The cottonwood tree casts long shadows across the porch this time of day. I planted it myself 40 years back, right after the boss died. Thought he'd like having shade where he used to sit every evening, watching the sun go down over those mountains. The tree's taller than the barn now. Funny how things grow when you're not paying attention. You want to know about that photograph on the mantel, muchacho? The one in the silver frame, with the glass all yellowed and the edges worn from being handled too much? I've seen you looking at it when you think nobody's watching. Young couple standing in front of this very house. Woman in a blue dress. Man in his Sunday suit, looking like someone just told him he won the lottery, and he can't quite believe it. That's Lucas Reed and his wife, Wilhelmina. Everyone called her Willa, though. She hated Wilhelmina, said it made her sound like somebody's maiden aunt who collected cats and complained about the weather. The boss, that's what I called Lucas, even after he told me 100 times to use his name, he always called her Willa, said it's soft, like the word itself was something precious. You're wondering why I'm telling you this story, because you asked who they were, and because I'm 75 years old and I was there when it started. I saw the whole thing unfold, from the first day she arrived with nothing but a trunk and her dignity to the day we buried her 2 years ago. 25 years of marriage those two had. 25 years of building something real out of dust and determination. The town tells the story wrong these days. They say Lucas Reed saved a desperate woman at a train depot. They make him out to be some kind of hero, riding in to rescue the poor mail-order bride who got rejected. Makes for a good tale when the whiskey's flowing and folks want to believe in noble cowboys and grateful women. But I was there, Miguel. I know what really happened. And I'm telling you now because somebody ought to get it right, before I'm in the ground next to them, and the truth dies with me. Let me tell you about the heat that day. Arizona heat in May is something you feel in your bones before you feel it on your skin. It starts before dawn, building up like pressure in a boiler. By mid-morning, it's pressing down on everything. The buildings, the animals, the people trying to pretend they've got business to conduct in the middle of the day. By afternoon, it's like God himself is holding his palm over the whole territory, seeing how much we can take before we crack. That day, May 16, 1883, the heat was mean. The kind of heat that makes metal too hot to touch and turns the wooden planks of the train platform into something soft enough to leave boot prints. The kind that sends sensible men into the saloon and keeps women indoors with the shutters drawn. Even the flies moved slow, like the air itself had turned to honey. I was in the barn at the Double R, about 5 miles outside Copper Creek. We'd lost a horse the night before. Colic. I'd been up with her until she died, and I was tired in a way that went deeper than just needing sleep. Tired of losing things. Tired of watching the boss work himself into the ground trying to make this ranch succeed when the land kept taking and giving back nothing but dust and dead animals. The boss had ridden into town that morning for supplies. Said he'd be back by supper. Didn't say much else. Lucas never said much in those days. Kept his words locked up tight, like speaking too many might cost him something he couldn't afford to pay. I didn't know it then, but while I was digging a hole for that dead horse, everything was about to change. In Copper Creek, on the platform of a train depot that looked like every other depot in every other forgotten town across the territory, a woman was standing alone. She'd been there for 30 minutes already. Her name was Wilhelmina Dawson, and she was 23 years old. She'd traveled from Boston. 3 days on trains that smelled like coal smoke and unwashed bodies, and the particular desperation of people going west because they had no other choice. 3 days sitting upright because she couldn't afford a sleeping berth, eating hard biscuits and warm water, watching the landscape change from green to brown to something that looked like God had given up halfway through creation. She'd come to marry a man named James Walton, never met him, didn't know what he looked like beyond a photograph that might have been taken 10 years ago for all she could tell. Didn't know if he was kind or cruel, smart or stupid, gentle or rough. Only knew what his letters had said, respectable businessman, owns property in Copper Creek, seeks educated wife of good character and modest means. Modest means. That was a nice way of saying her family was poor and he knew it. That she was coming west, not because she wanted adventure, but because her father's tailoring business had failed and there were too many mouths to feed in a 3-room apartment in Boston. That marriage to a stranger was better than being a burden to a family that couldn't carry any more weight. She'd accepted his proposal by letter, thought she'd made her peace with it during the long journey west, thought she could be a good wife to a man she'd never met, could make a home in this harsh country, could build something like happiness out of duty and determination. Then James Walton had taken one look at her and changed his mind. Too educated, his letter said. The station master had handed it to her with a look that said this wasn't the first time he'd delivered this kind of news. Too argumentative in manner, evidence of an unsuitable temperament. He'd enclosed a ticket for the eastbound train the next morning and wished her well, finding a more appropriate situation. So there she stood, trunk at her feet, $12.30 in her reticule. Letter crumpled in one gloved hand, heat pressing down on her like judgment itself, and the slow, terrible realization that she had nowhere to go. She couldn't go back to Boston. Her family had thrown her a small party the night before she left. Nothing fancy, just her mother's attempt at a cake and her father's awkward blessing and her sister Emily crying into her sleeve. They'd all known what it meant. One less person to feed, one less source of tension between her brothers who resented having to share their wages with sisters who couldn't work. One less reminder of how far the family had fallen. If she went back now, rejected and failed, it would be worse than never leaving. She stood there doing mathematics in her head. $12, maybe enough for a room at the boarding house for 2 weeks if she was careful. Maybe enough to find work, though what kind of work a woman could do in a town this size was limited to things she didn't want to think about. Maybe enough to buy time to figure out what came next. Or she could take the train tomorrow morning, go back east, face the disappointment in her mother's eyes and the resignation in her father's voice and Emily's questions about why she'd come home so soon. Face the knowledge that she'd failed before she'd even started. The station master had already gone back to his office. Probably seen this before, too. Probably seen a lot of women standing alone on this platform, calculating their options and coming up with nothing good. He'd offered her one sympathetic glance and a mumbled, "Happens sometimes, Miss Dawson," and that was all the kindness he could spare. She adjusted her bonnet against the sun. Her navy traveling dress was dark with sweat and dust from the train. The fabric stuck to her back. Her feet hurt, in boots that had been fine for Boston streets but weren't made for this heat. Her throat was dry. Her head ached. And underneath all of that was a deeper pain, the kind that came from being weighed and measured and found wanting by a man who'd never bothered to speak a single word to her. That's when she saw him watching. A man in worn range clothes standing near the corner of the depot building. He'd been there for several minutes, she realized, just standing, not moving toward her, not speaking, just watching with an intensity that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. There was something in the way he stood, careful, deliberate, like a man who thought through every action before taking it. She couldn't see his face clearly. The wide brim of his hat cast his features in shadow, but she could see his hands, rough and tanned. And the way he held himself, weight shifted slightly back like he was ready to move but hadn't decided which direction yet. He was making up his mind about something. She lifted her chin and met his shadowed gaze directly. If he was going to stare, she'd give him something to stare at. She'd not cower. Not here, not after coming this far, not after everything. The man took off his hat. Hair the color of burnished copper, cut short but unruly in the heat. A face weathered by sun and wind, maybe 30 years old, maybe older, hard to tell with men who worked outdoors. A strong jaw darkened with several days of stubble, and eyes, the color of the sky after a storm, gray-blue and steady. He walked toward her slowly, Not threatening, but not tentative either. Just direct, like a man who'd made a decision and was following through. As he got closer, she noticed the way he moved. Economical, nothing wasted, every step placed with purpose. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was deep with a slight drawl. "You waiting on someone?" The question was polite enough, but there was something else underneath it. A knowledge, maybe. Like he already knew the answer and was asking anyway, giving her the chance to say it out loud or keep her troubles private. Willa made a choice. "No," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "It appears I've been left behind." The man stepped closer, close enough that she could see his face clearly now. The sun-weathered lines around his eyes, the scar above his left eyebrow, the way he was looking at her, not with pity exactly, but with something like recognition. Like he knew what it felt like to be left standing in the dust while everyone else moved on. "You the mail-order bride?" he asked. "The one for James Walton?" Heat flooded her cheeks. Of course everyone would know. Small town like this, a mail-order bride arriving was probably the most interesting thing that had happened all month. And her rejection would be even more interesting. She could already imagine the gossip spreading through Copper Creek like wildfire through dry grass. "I was," she said, gesturing to the crumpled letter. "Mr. Walton found me lacking upon inspection. He's arranged passage back east on tomorrow's train." The man's jaw tightened slightly. What did he find so lacking? The question wasn't idle curiosity. There was something sharp underneath it, almost angry. "According to his letter, I'm too educated for a proper wife." Willa heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't try to hide it, and argumentative in manner. Apparently questioning the wisdom of making me wait at the station for 3 hours was evidence of an unsuitable temperament. For a moment the man didn't respond. Then something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not a happy smile, more like satisfaction at having a suspicion confirmed. "Walton's a fool," he said simply. Then he did something unexpected. He walked past her to where her trunk sat in the dust, bent down, and lifted it easily onto his shoulder. When he turned back to face her, his expression was careful, neutral. But there was something in his eyes, a question maybe, or an offer he wasn't quite ready to make out loud. "I've got a wagon around the corner," he said. Willa's heart started beating faster. Every warning her mother had ever given her about strange men and trusting too easily came flooding back. This was dangerous. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions. Getting into a wagon with him could lead to any number of terrible outcomes. But staying here wasn't safe either. And there was something about the way he'd called Walton a fool, not because he thought she was some prize worth having, but because he seemed genuinely insulted by the principle of the thing, by the rudeness of rejecting someone after making them travel across the country. "Who are you?" she asked. "Lucas Reed." He shifted the trunk on his shoulder. "I run the Double R Ranch about 5 miles out of town. And what exactly are you offering, Mr. Reed?" He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him choosing his words, weighing what to say and what to leave unsaid. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. "You need a place to stay," he said. "I need help at the ranch. Cooking, cleaning, household management. In exchange, you'd have a room, food, and my protection." He paused. "And when you've saved enough to go wherever you want to go, I'll take you there myself." It was a business arrangement, nothing more than that. He wasn't offering marriage or romance or rescue, just work and wages and a roof over her head until she could figure out what came next. Willa tried to think clearly through the heat and exhaustion and humiliation. This could be a trap. He could be lying about everything. The ranch might not exist. He might be planning to take her somewhere isolated and do things she didn't want to think about. She'd heard stories about what happened to women who trusted the wrong men in territories where law was more suggestion than rule. But what were her alternatives? The boarding house, with $12 that would run out eventually. The eastbound train tomorrow, carrying her back to a family that couldn't afford to feed her. James Walton's continued presence in this town. a constant reminder of her failure and his judgment. What about my reputation? The question came out before she could stop it. Lucas Reed's expression shifted. Something almost like respect crossed his face, like he appreciated that she'd thought to ask, like it meant she was practical rather than desperate, considering consequences rather than just grasping at the first offer. "Won't pretend that won't be talk," he said. "Single woman living on a ranch with a bachelor, but I'll handle that." He met her eyes directly. "I won't let anyone disrespect you, Miss Dawson. You have my word on that." The station master emerged from his office, wiping sweat from his forehead. He saw Lucas holding Willa's trunk and stopped short. His eyes went from Lucas to Willa and back again, and something like understanding crossed his face. "Reed," he said, nodding. "This the lady you mentioned?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "Station master," he said clearly, loudly enough that anyone nearby would hear. "I'd appreciate it if you'd spread the word. My wife will be staying at the Double R from now on." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Wife. He'd said wife. Not housekeeper, not employee, not even friend. Wife. Creating a fiction right here in front of the station master to protect her reputation before the gossip could even start. The station master's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Your wife?" he repeated. "I didn't know you were married, Reed." "Just happened," Lucas said smoothly. "Recent arrangement. I'd appreciate your discretion in the matter." Which was Cowboy for, "Tell everyone, but tell them I said it was my wife, so they know to keep their mouths respectful." The station master looked at Willa. She could see him waiting for her to confirm or deny, to call out the lie or play along. This was her moment, her choice. She could tell the truth, embarrass both of them, and be back where she started, alone on a platform with nowhere to go. Or she could accept this stranger's offer and step into whatever came next. "Mr. Reed has been very kind," she heard herself say. It wasn't a confirmation, exactly, but it wasn't a denial either. The station master seemed to take it as enough. "Well then," he said slowly, "congratulations to you both. I'll make sure folks know Mrs. Reed has arrived safely." Lucas started walking toward the corner of the building. After a moment's hesitation, Willa followed. Her legs felt unsteady. Her mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened, what she'd just agreed to, what kind of arrangement she was walking into. The wagon was exactly where he'd said it would be, sturdy, well-maintained, hitched to two bay horses that stood patiently in the shade. Lucas loaded her trunk into the back with easy strength, then came around to offer his hand to help her up onto the high seat. His palm was calloused but warm. His grip was firm without being crushing. He held her hand just long enough for her to settle onto the bench seat, then let go immediately and walked around to climb up on the other side. For a long moment they sat there in silence. The horses shifted in their traces. The leather creaked. Somewhere down the street someone laughed. The ordinary sounds of a town going about its business, unaware that Willa's entire life had just changed direction. "You still have time to change your mind," Lucas said quietly. He wasn't looking at her. His hands rested loosely on the reins, but he hadn't signaled the horses to move, waiting for her answer, giving her one last chance to step back from the precipice. Willa thought about the train tomorrow morning. She thought about Boston, about her mother's worried face and her father's disappointment and Emily's questions, about James Walton's rejection letter and the particular humiliation of being returned like a package marked "wrong item received." She thought about this stranger beside her who'd called Walton a fool and offered her work instead of charity, who'd claimed her as his wife to protect her reputation when he didn't even know her name. "No," she said, and her voice was firmer this time. "I came west to build a new life. I intend to do just that." Lucas Reed nodded once. Then he clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward, carrying them both toward whatever came next. The ride out of Copper Creek gave Willa her first real look at the territory. The town was small, one main street with buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up quickly and might blow away just as fast. A general store, saloon, church, bank, and scattered houses behind the commercial strip. Nothing like Boston. nothing like anything she knew. Beyond the town, the landscape opened up into something vast and unforgiving. Brown earth scattered with scrub brush and the occasional defiant cactus. Mountains in the distance, purple and hazy with heat. Sky so big it made her feel small and exposed. The sun beat down without mercy. Dust rose from the wagon wheels and settled on everything, her dress, her face, her carefully packed hope that this new start might work. Lucas drove in silence, not hostile silence, just the quiet of a man who didn't waste words. Willa found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. The way he held the reins, relaxed but attentive. The way he scanned the horizon constantly, like he was reading the land the way she might read a book. "How long have you had the ranch?" she finally asked. It was the first either of them had spoken since leaving town. 8 years, Lucas said. Lucas bought it from the previous owner's daughter. They couldn't keep it after, he trailed off, then seemed to reconsider, after hard times. There was something in his voice, a weight, like there was more to that story than he was saying. Willa filed it away as something to ask about later when she had the right to ask personal questions instead of just being a stranger he'd picked up at a depot. "What kind of ranch is it?" she asked instead. "Cattle? Some horses? Chickens?" He glanced at her. "The chickens are mean, especially the brown hen. Watch yourself around her." It was said so seriously that Willa almost laughed. Almost. But she caught herself, unsure if humor was appropriate yet, unsure of the rules of this strange arrangement they'd entered into. "I'll remember that," she said. They passed a cluster of buildings in the distance, another ranch maybe, or just an isolated homestead. Lucas lifted a hand in greeting to someone Willa couldn't see. The gesture seemed automatic, ingrained. Everyone knew everyone out here, she realized, which meant everyone would know about her by sunset. "The people in town," she said carefully. "What will you tell them about us?" "The truth." She looked at him sharply. "That you needed help, and I offered it," Lucas continued. "That you're working as my housekeeper. That I called you my wife to protect your reputation, but within the ranch walls, you're Miss Dawson. Nothing more than that." "Unless I decide otherwise," Willa heard herself say. It came out more boldly than she'd intended. But she'd spent the entire journey west being passive, being the obedient bride-to-be, being whatever James Walton wanted her to be, until he decided she wasn't good enough. If she was going to do this, if she was going to accept Lucas Reed's offer and stay in this harsh territory, then she needed to establish something fundamental. She had agency in this arrangement. Lucas turned to look at her fully for the first time since they'd left town. "Yes," he said simply, "unless you decide otherwise." Something in her chest loosened slightly. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice in climbing into this wagon with a stranger who'd offered her work instead of rescue. The road curved around a rise, and suddenly there it was, the Double R Ranch spread out in a shallow valley. A house built of squared logs and stone, modest but solid-looking, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, a corral with horses, and everywhere that same brown earth and scattered vegetation, the landscape harsh and unforgiving, but somehow honest in its harshness. "It's not much," Lucas said, but there was pride in his voice underneath the disclaimer. This was his place, something he'd built or maintained or fought for, something that mattered to him. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, older, maybe 50, with graying hair and the weathered brown skin of someone who'd spent his whole life outdoors. He wore dusty work clothes and moved with the economical grace of someone who knew exactly how to conserve energy in this heat. "That's Pedro Mendoza," Lucas said. "My foreman. He helps with the ranch work and stays in the bunkhouse." Pedro walked toward the wagon, his dark eyes taking in the sight of Willa with careful assessment. Not hostile, but not welcoming either. Just watching, measuring, trying to figure out who she was and what her presence meant. Lucas brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. "Pedro," he called. Come meet Miss Dawson. She'll be staying with us." Pedro approached slowly. As he got closer, Willa could see his face more clearly. Lined and weathered, but with kind eyes. The kind of face that had seen a lot of life and learned when to speak and when to stay silent. "Welcome to the Double R, señorita," he said. His English was accented but clear. His tone was respectful. But there was something in the way he looked at her. A question, maybe, or a test that she didn't yet understand she was taking. Lucas climbed down from the wagon and came around to help Willa descend. Again that brief contact of hands. Again that immediate release once her feet touched the ground. Everything proper. Everything respectful. Nothing assumed. "I'll show you the house," Lucas said. But Pedro stepped forward, and something passed between him and Lucas. A look. A silent communication of the sort that came from years of working together. "Boss," Pedro said quietly, "perhaps I should show her around first. You have work to finish in the north pasture." Lucas hesitated. Willa saw the conflict on his face, the desire to be hospitable versus whatever work needed doing. Ranch work didn't wait for social niceties. She understood that already. "That's fine," she said. "Mr. Mendoza can show me where things are." Lucas looked relieved. "I'll be back before supper," he said. Then to Pedro, "Take care of her." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Pedro nodded. "Si, boss." Lucas walked toward the corral where a horse was already saddled and waiting. Within moments he'd mounted and was riding north, leaving Willa alone with Pedro Mendoza in the dusty yard of a ranch she'd never seen before, in a territory she didn't understand, with a man she didn't know. Pedro looked at her for a long moment. "You are hungry, señorita?" he asked. "Thirsty," Willa admitted. "Come, there is water." He led her not to the house, but toward a pump near the barn, worked the handle until clear water gushed out, then stepped back to let her drink. The water was cool and metallic tasting, and the best thing she'd had in days. When she'd drunk her fill, Pedro spoke again. "The boss is a good man," he said carefully, "but he needs to know you can survive here. This land is hard, señorita. It does not forgive weakness." "I'm not weak," Willa said. "No?" Pedro's eyebrow rose. "Then prove it." He started walking toward a ramshackle structure behind the house. As they got closer, Willa could hear clucking and the rustle of feathers. The chicken coop. Pedro opened the gate and gestured inside. "The hens lay their eggs," he said, "but they are protective, especially the brown one. She has sent 3 men to the doctor with pecks deep enough to need stitches." He crossed his arms. "The boss says you work for your keep. Show me you can collect the eggs." Willa looked at the chicken coop. Inside she could see several hens moving around in the straw, and there, in the corner, watching her with one beady eye, was the largest, meanest-looking brown chicken she'd ever seen. This was a test. She understood that now. Pedro was testing whether she'd run at the first sign of difficulty, whether she'd cry or complain or prove that James Walton had been right about her unsuitability for frontier life. She thought about her sister Emily back in Boston, thought about the promise she'd made to herself on the train west, that she'd succeed, that she'd build something, that she'd prove everyone wrong who'd ever counted her as a burden or a failure. "Where's the basket?" she asked. Pedro's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Maybe approval, maybe just curiosity about what would happen next. He handed her a woven basket. Willa took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped into the chicken coop. The brown hen watched her approach. Willa could swear the bird was calculating, measuring, deciding whether this new human was worth the effort of an attack. The other hens scattered nervously. Willa moved slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice, the same voice she'd used with her mother's cat back in Boston when it was in a mood. She collected 3 eggs from the easier nests, moving carefully to avoid startling the birds. Then she approached the brown hen's nest. The bird's head swiveled to track her movement. Its beak opened slightly, and Willa could see it gathering itself for attack. "Listen," Willa said quietly. "I don't want to fight you. I just need the eggs. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, I'm getting those eggs." The brown hen cocked its head. For a moment, they stared at each other, woman and bird, both stubborn, both territorial. Then Willa made her move. Fast, decisive, reaching under the hen before it could react. The bird squawked and pecked, catching her hand hard enough to draw blood. But Willa didn't pull back. She grabbed the 2 eggs beneath the hen, tucked them into her basket, and extracted her bleeding hand all in one smooth motion. The brown hen flapped its wings furiously, but the deed was done. Willa walked out of the coop with 8 eggs and a bleeding hand. Pedro was standing exactly where she'd left him, arms still crossed. But now there was definitely approval in his expression. "The hen got you," he observed. "The hen can go to hell," Willa said. Then she realized what she'd said, the language she'd used, the anger in her voice, and felt heat flood her face. Ladies in Boston didn't talk like that. Her mother would have been horrified. But Pedro threw back his head and laughed. It was a good laugh, warm and genuine, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look younger for a moment. "I think you will survive here after all, señorita," he said. He led her to the house finally, carrying her trunk as easily as Lucas had. The porch was covered, facing west, toward the mountains. The door was unlocked. Apparently theft wasn't a concern this far from town. Inside, the house was exactly what Willa had expected. Sparse, functional, a bachelor's domain with nothing soft or decorative to mark it as a home. The main room served as both parlor and dining area. A stone fireplace at one end, a solid table with chairs at the other, a bookshelf with maybe 24 volumes, everything clean but worn. "Kitchen through there," Pedro said, pointing. 2 bedrooms down the hall. Boss takes the one at the end. The other has been for storage, but he cleared it this morning. That one is yours." This morning. Lucas had known he was going to offer her this arrangement before he'd even approached her at the depot. Had thought it through, made the decision, prepared a room for her. It wasn't impulse. It was deliberate choice. Willa didn't know what to do with that information yet. Pedro set her trunk in the small bedroom. It was simple. A narrow bed with a plain quilt, a chest of drawers, a window that looked out toward the east, and there, visible through the window, on a small rise behind the house, were 3 wooden crosses, graves. Willa stepped closer to the window, staring at those markers. "Who were they?" she asked quietly. Pedro's face went still. "People the boss could not save," he said finally. "People he carries with him, every day." "What happened to them?" "That is the boss's story to tell, not mine." Pedro moved toward the door. "I will leave you to settle in. Water for washing is at the pump outside. The outhouse is 50 yards behind the house. Supper will be at sunset." He paused in the doorway. "Señorita," he said, "you asked me to prove you are not weak. You did that with the brown hen, but surviving here takes more than one morning of courage. It takes choosing to stay when things get hard, choosing to keep going when you want to quit." His eyes were serious. "The boss needs someone who will stay." "I'll stay," Willa said. "We will see," Pedro replied. Then he was gone, leaving Willa alone in her small room with her trunk and her thoughts and the view of 3 graves that marked people Lucas Reed could not save. She sat on the edge of the bed. Her hand was still bleeding from the chicken's peck. Her dress was filthy with dust and sweat. Her entire body ached from 3 days of travel and the bone-deep exhaustion of too many changes too fast. But she'd done it. She'd made a choice, accepted an offer, stepped into something unknown. And for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something other than fear or resignation. She felt possibility. Through the window, the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains. The light turned golden, softening the harsh edges of the landscape. Those 3 crosses cast long shadows across the small cemetery. People Lucas Reed could not save. Willa touched the window glass, looking at those graves. She didn't know their story yet. didn't know what haunted the man who'd offered her work instead of rescue, who'd called her his wife to protect her reputation, who'd prepared a room for her before even knowing if she'd accept. But she would learn. She would stay long enough to understand this place, this man, this strange new beginning. Long enough to save money for Emily. Long enough to build something that mattered. Long enough to prove that being rejected by James Walton wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. She unpacked slowly that first afternoon. I know because I watched her window from the barn, not spying, you understand, just keeping an eye out. The boss had asked me to take care of her, and I took that serious. A woman alone with two men she didn't know, 5 miles from town, in territory that didn't always treat women gentle. I wanted to make sure she wasn't frightened, wasn't planning to run. The sun moved across the sky while she worked. I could see her shadow moving against the curtainless window, back and forth, methodical. Unpacking a life from a trunk, making a space her own in a house that belonged to strangers. Around 4 in the afternoon, the shadow stopped moving. She sat at the small desk by the window. The boss had put it there that morning, carried it from the storage room. And I saw her bent over something, writing, I figured. Women wrote letters. My mother used to write to her sister in Mexico every month, long letters full of news about nothing much, but the writing itself seemed to comfort her. I didn't know then what Willa was writing. Found out years later, after she died. Lucas showed me the letters she'd written but never sent, the ones she'd saved in a wooden box under their bed. 23 letters to her sister Emily, written in the first year. Some never sent because she couldn't afford the postage. Some never sent because they were too honest, too raw to share. This was the first one. May 16, 1883. Dearest Emily, I am writing to you from a place called the Double R Ranch, 5 miles outside a town called Copper Creek in Arizona Territory. I know that means nothing to you. It means very little to me yet. But I wanted you to know where I am, in case something happens and you need to find me. James Walton rejected me at the train depot. I won't burden you with the details. They're humiliating and don't matter now. What matters is that I had $12 and a ticket back to Boston for tomorrow morning, and then a stranger offered me work. His name is Lucas Reed. He owns this ranch. He needs someone to manage his household, and I need a place to stay until I can save enough money to send for you. That's still my plan, Emily. That hasn't changed. I will get you out of that apartment. I will give you the life Mama wanted for us before everything fell apart. The ranch is nothing like Boston. Everything is brown and dusty, and the sky is so big it makes me feel like I might blow away. There's a Mexican man named Pedro who tested me by making me collect eggs from a vicious hen. I have the scratches to prove it, but I passed his test, I think. He laughed when I cursed at the chicken. Mr. Reed called me his wife in front of the station master to protect my reputation. But it's only pretense. Within these walls I'm Miss Dawson, housekeeper, nothing more. Unless I decide otherwise, he said. I don't know what to make of that yet. There are 3 graves behind the house. No one will tell me who they are. I'm frightened, Emily. Not of Mr. Reed or Pedro. They've been nothing but respectful. But of this place. Of failing here, too. Of not being able to save enough money. Of you being stuck in that apartment with Father's drinking and Mother's sadness and our brother's resentment while I'm out here pretending I know how to survive in a desert. But I can't come back. You know that. If I fail here, there's nowhere left to go. I miss you terribly. I miss your laugh and the way you used to braid my hair and how you'd sneak extra bread to me when the boys weren't looking. I miss Boston. Even the cramped apartment and the smell of Father's workshop and the sound of the street vendors in the morning. But I'm going to make this work. I have to. I'll write again when I can afford the postage. Until then, know that I love you and I'm thinking of you every day. Be strong for me. I'm trying to be strong for you. All my love, Willa. She folded that letter and tucked it into her journal. Couldn't afford to send it yet. Every penny mattered now. But the writing seemed to settle something in her because when she stood up from the desk, her shoulders were straighter, more determined. That's when she came out to face the kitchen. I was bringing in firewood when I heard her in there, opening cupboards, muttering to herself. The kitchen hadn't seen much use in the year since the boss's last housekeeper quit. That woman had lasted 3 months before deciding ranch life wasn't for her. Before that, we'd made do with whatever I could cook, beans mostly, and tough beef, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. I paused outside the door, listening. "Lord have mercy," I heard Willa say. "When was the last time someone organized this properly?" Then the sound of jars being moved, cupboard doors closing, her footsteps back and forth across the wooden floor. She was taking inventory, I realized, assessing what she had to work with. I knocked on the doorframe. She turned, and I got my first good look at her in proper light. She'd changed from her traveling dress into something simpler, a dark gray cotton that had seen better days, but was clean and practical. Her hair was still pinned up, but pieces had escaped around her face. The scratch on her hand from the brown hen had stopped bleeding, but would probably scar. "Señorita," I said, "I bring wood for the stove." "Thank you, Mr. Mendoza." She stepped back to let me pass. I loaded the firebox, showing her where we kept the kindling and how the damper worked. The stove was temperamental, needed coaxing to get it started, then watched carefully so it didn't overheat. She listened with the kind of attention that told me she was filing every detail away for later use. "What does Mr. Reed usually eat for supper?" she asked. I considered lying. Considered telling her that the boss was particular, that he expected fancy meals, that she'd need to work hard to please him. Another test. But something about the way she was looking at the meager supplies in the pantry, not with despair, but with calculation, like she was solving a problem, made me tell the truth instead. "Whatever there is," I said. "Beans and salt pork mostly, cornbread if we remember to make it. The boss, he does not complain about food." "When will he be back?" "Sunset, maybe an hour." She nodded, already planning. I left her to it and went back to my work. But I kept an ear out, listening to the sounds of her moving around the kitchen, the scrape of a pot, the splash of water, the rhythmic sound of something being chopped. She was cooking, and from the determined pace of it, she was cooking with purpose. The boss rode in just as the sun touched the mountains. I met him at the corral, took his horse while he washed up at the pump. He looked tired. We'd been up late the night before with the dying horse, and a full day's work after no sleep left marks on a man. But he looked calmer than he had that morning, like the hard physical labor had settled something in his mind. "She's still here?" he asked, splashing water on his face. "See, in the kitchen." He dried his hands on his trousers, suddenly looking uncertain. It was strange to see. The boss was always sure of himself when it came to ranch work, horses, cattle, land, but put a woman in his house, and he looked like a green boy at his first dance, not knowing where to put his hands or what to say. "She's settling in all right?" he asked. "She made the brown hen back down," I said. That got a small smile. "Did she now?" "Drew blood, but the señorita got the eggs." I paused. "She has strength, that one. Not the kind you see on the outside, the kind that goes deep." The boss nodded slowly. He started toward the house, then stopped. Turned back to me with something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Worry, maybe, or hope, or both mixed together. "Pedro," he said, "if this doesn't work out, if she wants to leave, then you take her to town like you promised," I finished. "But I think she stays." "Why?" I thought about that letter I'd later learned she was writing, about the way she'd faced down the brown hen with bleeding hands and determination, about the look in her eyes when she'd said she came west to build a new life. "Because she needs this place as much as this place needs her," I said. The boss looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and went inside. I wasn't there for that first supper. Ate in the bunkhouse like always, giving them privacy for their first real meal together. But Lucas told me about it later, years later, one night when we were both old men sitting on this very porch, and the memories were easier to talk about than they'd been when they were fresh. He said he walked into the house and stopped in the doorway. The kitchen smelled like food. Real food. Not just beans heating over a fire, but something that had been thought about, prepared with care. The table was set. Nothing fancy, just tin plates and cups, but set properly with the fork on the left and the knife on the right. There were even napkins, rough cloth ones she must have found somewhere and washed. And there was Willa, standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She'd lit the lamps. The golden light made the kitchen look different than it had that morning. Warmer, like someone lived there instead of just existed. "Supper's almost ready," she said without turning around. "I hope you don't mind that I used the salt pork. It was starting to turn." Lucas took off his hat, hung it on the peg by the door. "That's fine," he said. "That's what it's there for." An awkward silence fell. He told me he didn't know what to do with himself. In his own house, suddenly feeling like a guest. He'd lived alone for so long, just me and him, two men who understood each other without much talking, that having a woman in the kitchen made everything feel strange and formal. "You can sit," Willa said, still not looking at him. "I'll bring the food." He sat, watched her move around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd done this work before. She wasn't graceful, knocked into the counter once, nearly dropped a spoon, but she was competent, determined, making do with what she had. She set a bowl in front of him. It was stew. She'd taken the salt pork and the sprouting potatoes and the onions and made something that actually looked like a meal, with the last of the old cornbread on the side. "It's not much," she said, sitting down across from him. "Tomorrow I'll need to know what you want me to buy when we go to town. The pantry is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Limited." "We can go Saturday," Lucas said. "Make a list." They ate in silence. Not comfortable silence, not yet, but not hostile either. Just two people feeling their way through a situation neither had been in before. He told me the stew was good, better than anything he'd eaten in months. The salt pork was still tough, but she'd cooked it long enough that it had flavor. The potatoes were soft, the onions were sweet. "You're a good cook," he said finally. "I'm an adequate cook," she corrected. "My mother tried to teach me, but I was always more interested in books than baking. This is survival cooking, Mr. Reed. Nothing more. It's better than what I've been making. That's not a high bar to clear." He almost smiled at that. There was something direct about her, something honest that he wasn't used to. Most people treated him with either excessive friendliness or wary distance. But Willa spoke to him like he was just a person, not a boss or a stranger or a potential threat. Just a man who needed feeding. They finished eating. Willa stood to clear the plates, but Lucas stopped her. "I'll help," he said. "You worked all day. So did you." It was true. She'd traveled for 3 days, been rejected by her intended husband, agreed to work for a stranger, passed a test with a vicious hen, unpacked her life, and cooked supper in an unfamiliar kitchen. That was a full day's work by any measure. They washed dishes side by side, him washing, her drying. The kitchen was small enough that they kept accidentally bumping into each other, his elbow against her arm, her skirt brushing his leg. Each time it happened, they both apologized and stepped apart, careful to maintain proper distance. "Mr. Reed," Willa said as she dried the last plate, "I need to understand the rules of this arrangement." Lucas set the dishpan aside and turned to face her. "What kind of rules?" "Practical ones." She folded the drying cloth with precise movements. "What time do you take your meals? What are my duties beyond cooking and cleaning? How often do we go to town? How much am I being paid and when?" He should have thought about all this before offering her the job, should have had answers ready. But the truth was, he'd seen her standing on that platform and made a decision based on instinct rather than planning. Now he had to figure out the details. "Breakfast at sunrise," he said. "Dinner at midday if I'm close to the house, otherwise I'll take something with me. Supper when the work's done, usually around sunset." She nodded, filing that away. "Duties are cooking, cleaning, mending, managing the household. The garden out back needs tending if you're inclined. It's been neglected." He paused. "As for pay, I was thinking room and board, plus $20 a month. That seem fair?" Her eyes widened slightly. $20 a month was generous for a housekeeper. More than fair, enough that she could save and still have money for necessities. "That's more than adequate," she said quietly. "Then we have an agreement." He offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment, that work-roughened hand, scarred and calloused from years of ranch labor, then took it. Her grip was firm, not trying to match his strength, but not limp either. A businesswoman's handshake. "One more thing," Lucas said, not letting go yet, "about what I told the station master, about calling you my wife. I understand why you did it. Do you?" He searched her face. "Because I need you to know. That's for their benefit, not mine. In town, let them think what they want. It'll keep the gossip manageable. But here, on this ranch, you're Miss Dawson. You have your room, your privacy, your choices." He released her hand. "I won't ever presume otherwise." Something in her expression shifted, softened, maybe. Or just acknowledged that he was trying to do right by her in a situation where doing right was complicated. "Thank you," she said. Then, almost shy, "You can call me Willa, if you'd like." "Willa," he repeated, like he was testing how it felt. "I'm Lucas. Mr. Reed makes me feel like I'm in trouble with the schoolmarm." That got a small smile from her. First one he'd seen. It changed her whole face, made her look younger and less guarded. Made him realize that beneath the determination and the defensive pride, she was just a young woman a long way from home, trying to make the best of a bad situation. "Well then, Lucas," she said, "I should let you get some rest. I imagine tomorrow will be another long day." He nodded and headed toward his bedroom, paused in the doorway. "Willa?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you stayed." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. "Ask me again in a month. We'll see if you still mean that." But she was smiling when she said it. "I found her on the porch that night. Couldn't sleep myself. Never could after we lost an animal. Kept thinking about that horse, wondering if there was something I could have done different. So I walked out to check the barn one more time, make sure the others were settled, and I saw her there, sitting on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. She didn't hear me at first, just sat there with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring up at that big Arizona sky like it might have answers written in it. "Señorita," I said softly, not wanting to startle her, "you should be sleeping." She turned, and I saw her face in the moonlight. Not crying. She wasn't the crying kind. I'd already figured that much. But thoughtful. Maybe a little overwhelmed. "I've never seen so many stars," she said. "In Boston, you can barely see any. Too many buildings, too much smoke from the factories." I sat down on the steps beside her, leaving respectful distance between us. "My mother used to say the stars were souls watching over us," I said. "All the people who came before, keeping an eye on the ones still living. That's a comforting thought." "You believe it?" She considered that. "I don't know what I believe anymore," she said finally. 3 days ago I believed I was going to marry James Walton and start a new life as his wife. Yesterday I believed I might have to go back to Boston in shame. Tonight I'm sitting on a stranger's porch in the middle of a desert working as a housekeeper, and tomorrow I'll be collecting eggs from a chicken that wants me dead." She laughed, but it sounded tired. "Nothing is what I expected." "Expected is boring," I said. That got a real laugh. "True," she admitted. "Expected would have been marrying Mr. Walton and spending my life being whatever he wanted me to be. At least this is interesting." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The night sounds of the ranch settling around us, horses shifting in the corral, cattle lowing in the distance, the wind moving through the scrub brush. City girl like her probably wasn't used to so much quiet. In Boston, there'd always be noise, carriages and voices and the general hum of people living on top of each other. Out here, the silence was big enough to swallow you whole if you weren't careful. "Those graves," she said suddenly, "the ones behind the house. Mr. Mendoza, Pedro, can you tell me about them?" I'd been expecting that question. "What did the boss tell you?" I asked carefully. "Nothing. You said they were his story to tell." "They are, but you know the story. See, I was here." I looked up at the stars, at all those watching souls. They were the Davis family, William, Sarah, and their son Thomas. They owned this ranch before the boss bought it. What happened to them? I told her what I could about the winter of 1880, the influenza that swept through the territory that year, killing young and old, strong and weak, without discrimination. How the Davis family got sick all at once. How William sent for the doctor in Tucson, but the doctor was already overwhelmed with cases and couldn't come right away. How Lucas, who was just a ranch hand then, working for the Davises, rode to Tucson himself to fetch help. 3 days there and back, I said. Should have been 2, but there was a blizzard. Rare for this territory, but it happened sometimes. Snow in the mountains, bad enough to stop travel. I paused, remembering. By the time Lucas got back with the doctor, all 3 of them were dead. Neighbors had already buried them. Willa was quiet for a long moment. "And Lucas blames himself," she said. Not a question. "How did you know?" "Because he keeps a cemetery behind his house. Because he looks at those graves like they're waiting for him to answer for something." She pulled her knees closer. "Because guilt is heavy, and he carries it like a stone." Smart woman. She'd only known Lucas for half a day, and she'd already seen what took me months to understand. That he'd bought this ranch not because he wanted it, but because he felt he owed something to the dead. That he was trying to make it succeed as some kind of penance for not being fast enough, strong enough, lucky enough to save them. "The boss is a good man," I said, "but he punishes himself for things that were not his fault. The influenza would have killed them whether Lucas rode through that blizzard or not. The doctor said so, but Lucas, he does not believe it." "How long ago was this?" 3 years. He bought the ranch from William's daughter back east. She could not bear to come back after losing her whole family. I glanced at Willa. "You are the first woman to live in this house since Sarah Davis died." She absorbed that information. Understood, I think, why the house felt haunted. Why Lucas had been alone for so long. Why he'd cleared out that storage room and offered her a job maybe before he was even ready to have someone here. "He needs someone who will stay," she said, echoing my words from earlier. "See, but more than that, he needs someone who will help him let go. Help him understand that honoring the dead does not mean dying with them." Willa turned to look at me directly. "Is that what you think I can do?" she asked. "Help him?" "I think you have your own ghosts to outrun," I said. "Your own reasons for being here that have nothing to do with him. And maybe that is what he needs. Someone who is not trying to save him. Just someone who is here building their own life alongside his." She smiled, sad and small. "I'm not here to save anyone, Pedro. I'm barely managing to save myself." "That is enough," I told her. "More than enough." We sat there a while longer. Eventually she stood, brushed the dust from her skirt, and said good night. I watched her go inside, heard the soft click of her bedroom door closing. The house was dark except for one small light, her lamp, I figured, as she got ready for bed in a room that wasn't hers yet, but might become so if she stayed long enough. I thought about my mother then, how she'd come north from Sonora with my father, leaving behind her family, her language, her whole life to build something new in a territory that wasn't always kind to Mexicans. How she'd tended her garden like it was a piece of home she could keep alive in foreign soil. How she'd died when I was 15, leaving me with nothing but her recipes and her advice, and the memory of her singing while she worked. Willa reminded me of her somehow, not in looks or manner, but in that same stubborn determination, that refusal to be broken by circumstances, that belief that you could build a life anywhere if you worked hard enough and didn't give up. I hoped she stayed, not just for Lucas, though he needed someone, but for herself, because this territory might be harsh, but it was also honest. Out here, what you built was yours. What you survived made you stronger. And a woman who could face down the brown hen on her first day might just be able to face down everything else this land threw at her. I went to bed thinking about that, about whether Willa Dawson would still be here in a month, a year, a lifetime. About whether she'd become part of the ranch's story, or just a footnote in it. about whether those 3 graves would keep their hold on Lucas, or whether this Boston woman with her determination and her secrets might help him finally let go. Didn't know the answer yet, but I was curious to find out. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt mess I usually made. Someone knew what they were doing with the stove. I dressed quickly and headed to the main house, where I found Willa already in the kitchen, hair pinned up, wearing an apron she must have found somewhere, working over the stove like she'd been doing it for years. "Morning," she said, not looking up from the cornmeal she was stirring. "Breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes. The boss is up? Left an hour ago. Said something about checking the fence line in the east pasture." She glanced at me. "He didn't wake me. Should he have?" "No, the boss does not need permission to work his own land." "Good. I wasn't sure of the protocol." She poured coffee into 2 cups, handed me one. I took it gratefully, sipping the strong brew and feeling the fog lift from my brain. She'd made it perfectly. Not too bitter, not too weak. Just right. "You cook like this all the time?" I asked. "Like what?" "Like you are feeding an army instead of 2 men." She smiled slightly. "Habit from home. There were 8 of us in that apartment. If you didn't make enough, someone went hungry." She turned back to the stove. "Besides, leftovers can be packed for lunch. Mr. Reed, Lucas, mentioned he takes food with him when he's working far from the house." Smart and practical. The meal was simple. Cornmeal mush with a little honey, some of the eggs from yesterday, more coffee, but it was hot and filling and made with care. We ate at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us, and I found myself telling her about the ranch, about the 100 head of cattle we were trying to build up to 200, about the drought 2 years back that nearly broke us, about the neighboring ranches, the Coltons to the north, good people, the Circle T to the west, where Lucas used to work before he bought this place, about the challenges of making a cattle operation profitable in territory that could turn on you without warning. "Why does Lucas do it?" she asked. "If it's this hard, why not sell? Go somewhere easier?" "Because this land is his," I said simply, "and a man needs something that is his, something he built, something that matters." She nodded slowly. Understood that, I think. She was looking for the same thing herself, wasn't she? Something that mattered. Something she built with her own hands. Something that proved she was more than the burden her family couldn't carry, or the bride James Walton didn't want. After breakfast, I showed her around the ranch properly, the barn with its 4 horses, 2 for riding, 2 for the wagon. The tack room where we kept saddles and bridles and all the equipment that needed maintaining. The small smithy where basic repairs could be made. The chicken coop, which she approached with visible wariness. "The brown hen remembers me," she said, eyeing the bird through the wire. "The brown hen remembers everyone, holds grudges like a woman scorned." That made her laugh. We walked out to the garden, last. It was in bad shape, weeks of neglect showing in the overgrown weeds and struggling plants. But the soil was good, and with work it could produce again. Willa knelt down, examining the plants with careful attention. "Some of these can be saved," she said. "The tomatoes are still alive under all these weeds, and these bean plants, if I stake them properly, they might produce." She looked up at me. "Did someone plant this recently?" "The boss tried last spring. But he does not have time to tend it properly." "Then I'll tend it." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "My mother always said a garden was the difference between surviving and thriving. If you can grow your own food, you're not at the mercy of markets and weather and other people's prices." "Your mother sounds wise." Something shadowed her face. She was, before everything fell apart. Willa turned away from the garden, looking toward the mountains in the distance. "My father had a tailoring business in Boston. Custom suits for wealthy men. We lived comfortably, not rich, but secure. I went to a good school. My sister Emily took piano lessons. We had a maid who came twice a week." Past tense. All of it past tense. "What happened?" I asked gently. "My father's business partner stole from them. Embezzled for years, apparently, and by the time they discovered it, the money was gone, and so was the partner." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the pain underneath. We lost everything, the shop, our home, the life we'd known. Father started drinking. Mother grew silent. My brothers had to take jobs in factories instead of going to university. And Emily, she stopped. And Emily, I prompted. Emily had to give up her music. She was talented, Pedro, really talented. But piano lessons cost money we didn't have. Willa's hands clenched into fists. She was 14 years old, and she had to stop dreaming because we couldn't afford dreams anymore. Now I understood why she'd come west, why she'd accepted Walton's proposal sight unseen, why she'd taken Lucas's offer even though it meant working for strangers in a territory she didn't understand. You came here to make money, I said, to save enough to bring your sister west. To give her a future, Willa corrected. To make sure she doesn't end up like our mother, married to a broken man, trapped in poverty, watching all her hopes die one by one. She met my eyes. That's why I need this job to work, Pedro, not for me, for Emily. Does the boss know this? No, and I'd appreciate if you didn't tell him. She straightened her shoulders. I want him to judge me on my work, not my circumstances. I want to earn my place here. I respected that. Understood the pride that wouldn't accept pity or special treatment. Understood wanting to succeed on your own merits. Your secret is safe, I promised. We walked back to the house together. The morning was heating up already, that Arizona sun climbing toward its zenith. By afternoon it would be brutal, but for now it was almost pleasant. The air still cool, the light golden, the desert coming alive with small sounds as creatures went about their morning routines. Pedro, Willa said as we reached the porch, can I ask you something? See, do you think this can work, me being here? I thought about that question carefully, thought about Lucas and his guilt and his loneliness, thought about Willa and her determination and her secrets, thought about this ranch that needed both of them in different ways. I think it can work, I said finally, but it will be hard. This land does not give anything easily. You will have to fight for every small success. And the boss, he is a good man, but he is also a wounded one. He will not make things easy, even when he wants to. I'm not afraid of hard work. I know, but hard work alone is not enough. I paused, choosing my words. You must also decide what you are working toward. Are you just saving money to leave, or are you building something here that might be worth staying for? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. I don't know yet. Ask me in a month. Same thing she'd told Lucas the night before, buying herself time to figure it out, to see if this arrangement could become something more than just temporary survival, to discover whether the Double R Ranch might become a home instead of just a stopping place on the way to somewhere else. Fair enough, I said. She went inside to start on the housework. I headed out to check on the cattle in the south pasture. But as I rode out, I found myself thinking about Emily Dawson in Boston, a girl I'd never met, who didn't know her sister was out here in the Arizona desert fighting to save her. Didn't know that every egg collected from that vicious brown hen, every meal cooked, every day survived was building toward bringing her west. I hoped Willa succeeded. Not just for Emily's sake, but for Willa's. Because a woman carrying that much hope on her shoulders deserved to see it realized. 3 days passed. Willa settled into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. Up before dawn to start breakfast. Coffee ready when Lucas came in from checking the animals. Meals on time, kitchen clean, laundry done and hanging in the sun to dry. She tackled the garden with fierce determination, spent hours each day pulling weeds, staking plants, watering carefully from the well. The work left her sunburned and exhausted, hands blistered from unfamiliar labor. But she kept at it, stubborn as that brown hen she battled every morning. Lucas watched her from a distance. I saw him pause in his work sometimes, looking toward the house where she was scrubbing the porch or hanging laundry or working in the garden. Not staring exactly, just checking, making sure she was all right, making sure she was still there. They spoke little at meals. He wasn't used to conversation, and she seemed content with silence. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. More like two people feeling their way toward understanding, taking their time, not rushing anything. Then, on the fourth morning, Lucas came back from town with supplies, and with news that changed everything. I was in the barn when I heard the wagon. Came out to help unload, but stopped when I saw Lucas's face. Something was wrong. His jaw was tight, his movements sharp and angry. "What happened?" I asked, as he jumped down from the wagon seat. "Hargrove," Lucas said, spitting the name like a curse. Franklin Hargrove owned the bank in Copper Creek, also owned half the businesses in town, and had his fingers in most of the other half. Rich man. Powerful man. Not a man you wanted as an enemy. What did he do? Stopped me outside the general store, made a point of asking about my new wife. Lucas started unloading supplies with more force than necessary. Asked if I'd registered the marriage with the county clerk. Said there were legal formalities that needed to be observed. My gut tightened. What did you tell him? Told him it was none of his business. Lucas slammed a sack of flour onto the porch. But he just smiled. Said he was concerned about impropriety. Said a woman living with a man without proper legal marriage could damage both their reputations. He is trying to cause trouble. He's trying to force my hand. Lucas stopped, breathing hard. Make me either marry her for real or send her away. Either way, he wins something. Why does he care? Lucas's expression darkened. Because Hargrove was business partners with Thomas Walton, James's father, the man I testified against 5 years ago for cheating his workers. He leaned against the wagon, suddenly looking tired. I thought that was over, thought they'd moved on. But Hargrove hasn't forgotten. And now James Walton is his new partner, and they're both looking for ways to hurt me. I understood now. Willa wasn't just a woman who needed work. She was a weapon Walton had tried to use, send for a bride, then reject her publicly to embarrass Lucas. When Lucas took her in anyway, it thwarted their plan, but it also gave them new ammunition. Does the señorita know? I asked. Know what? That she's caught in the middle of a fight that has nothing to do with her? Lucas shook his head. No, and I'm not telling her. She's got enough to worry about. Boss, I'll handle it, Pedro. But his voice said he didn't know how. We finished unloading in tense silence. When we carried the last supplies inside, we found Willa in the kitchen, mixing dough for bread. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw our faces. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing, Lucas said too quickly. Just town gossip. Nothing to worry about. But Willa was smart. She saw the lie, saw the tension in Lucas's shoulders and the worry in my expression. Her hand stilled in the dough. If this is about me, she began, it's not. Lucas. She wiped her hands on her apron, meeting his eyes directly. I'm not a child. If there's trouble because of my presence here, I have a right to know. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, against his better judgment, he told her. About Hargrove. About Thomas Walton and the old grudge. About James being his new business partner. About the suggestion that their arrangement was improper. Willa listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised us both. Marry me. Lucas stared at her. What? Marry me, for real. She spoke calmly, like she was suggesting they plant more tomatoes. Make it legal. File the papers with the county clerk. Take away their ammunition. Willa, it doesn't have to mean anything, she continued. It's just paperwork. We already told everyone we're married. We might as well make it true legally. That way, no one can question the propriety of the arrangement. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. She met his gaze steadily. I need this job, Lucas. I need the money. If marrying you legally protects both our reputations and lets me keep working here, then it's a practical solution. Lucas looked helpless, torn between practicality and honor, between accepting her offer and feeling like he was trapping her into something she didn't really want. What about later? He asked quietly. What if you want to leave? Want a real marriage with someone else? Then we'll figure it out then. She turned back to her bread dough. But right now, This solves the problem. Unless you object to being married to me on paper." "No. God, no. That's not—" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Willa, you don't have to do this. I'll find another way." "There is no other way," she said simply. "Either we make it legal, or I have to leave. Those are the only options that don't leave us vulnerable to whatever Hargrove and Walton are planning." She was right. I knew it. Lucas knew it. Even she knew it, which was why she'd offered so quickly. "Saturday," Lucas said finally. "We'll go to town. Make it legal with the clerk." Willa nodded. Went back to kneading her dough like she'd just agreed to something no more significant than tomorrow's menu. But I saw her hands shaking slightly, saw the way she bit her lip, saw the moment of uncertainty before she squared her shoulders and pushed it away. She was afraid. Not of Lucas, I don't think she feared him at all, but of what this meant, of how quickly her life was changing, of how a business arrangement was becoming something more complicated with every passing day. Lucas left the kitchen. I followed him out to the porch where he stood staring at those 3 graves on the hill. "You are doing the right thing," I told him. "Am I?" He didn't look at me. Or am I taking advantage of a woman who has no other choices? She has choices. She chose to stay. She chose to offer this solution. Because she's desperate. Because she is practical, I corrected. And because I think she trusts you not to abuse the situation. Lucas was quiet for a long time. "I won't," he said finally. "Legal marriage or not, nothing changes. She's still Miss Dawson to me, still has her own room, her own life. I won't—" He stopped. "You will not take advantage," I finished. "I know. She knows it too. That is why she offered." He nodded slowly. But I could see the weight settling on him. Another responsibility, another person whose welfare depended on him. Another chance to fail someone the way he believed he'd failed the Davises. Inside, I heard Willa moving around the kitchen, heard the clang of pots, the scrape of a spoon, heard her humming something, a tune I didn't recognize, probably something from Boston. She was working through her fear the same way she worked through everything else, by keeping her hands busy and her mind focused on the task in front of her. I thought about Saturday. About Lucas and Willa standing in front of a county clerk, making promises they might or might not mean, binding themselves together in a way that was both real and pretend at the same time. Thought about what my mother would have said. She'd have called it fate, probably. Said that sometimes God pushes people together because they need each other, even if they don't know it yet. Said that love grows in strange soil sometimes, and you have to trust the roots to find their way. I hoped she was right, because Saturday was coming fast, and with it, everything would change. Friday night, Willa stayed up late mending Lucas's shirts. I saw the lamplight in the kitchen window long past when she usually retired. Couldn't sleep myself, too much on my mind about what Saturday would bring, so I walked out to check on the horses and saw her there through the window, bent over needle and thread, working by lamplight, fixing tears in fabric worn thin by years of hard use. She didn't have to do that. Mending wasn't urgent. Those shirts had been torn for months, and Lucas had been making do, but I understood what she was doing, keeping her hands busy so her mind couldn't spiral, working through her nervousness the only way she knew how. I almost knocked on the door, almost went in to tell her it would be all right, that Saturday was just paperwork, that nothing had to change unless she wanted it to. But something stopped me. The private concentration on her face, the way she was moving through her fear one stitch at a time. Some things a person has to work through alone, so I left her to it and went back to the bunkhouse. But I thought about her all night, this Boston woman who'd been here less than a week, who'd agreed to legally marry a stranger to protect a job she needed, who was mending his shirts like a wife, even though she'd insisted she was just a housekeeper. The lines were blurring already. Maybe they'd been blurred from the start. Saturday morning came too fast. Willa was already dressed when I got to the main house, not in her work clothes, but in the blue traveling dress she'd worn that first day at the depot. She'd brushed out her hair and pinned it up carefully, put on her good boots. She looked like she was going to something important, which I suppose she was. Lucas came out of his room wearing the same suit he'd worn to church the one time I'd convinced him to go. Dark wool, a little tight in the shoulders now. He'd built muscle since he bought it, but clean and pressed. He'd shaved, even combed his hair back with water. They looked at each other across the kitchen. Neither spoke for a long moment, just stood there, two people about to do something irreversible, both wondering if they were making a terrible mistake. "Ready?" Lucas asked finally. "As I'll ever be," Willis said. The ride to Copper Creek was quiet. I didn't go with them. This was something they needed to do alone. But Lucas told me later what happened, and I've filled in the details from what I know about the town and the people in it. The county clerk's office was above the general store. Small room, dusty, smelling of old paper and ink. The clerk was a thin man named Harrison, who'd been doing the job for 20 years and had seen every kind of marriage the territory could produce. Young couples in love, old widowers looking for companionship, arranged marriages, marriages of convenience. He didn't judge, just processed the paperwork. "Names?" he asked when Lucas and Willa walked in. "Lucas Reed and Wilhelmina Dawson." Harrison looked up, surprised. "I heard you two were already married," he said. "Station master told me your wife arrived last week." "We want to make it legal," Lucas said. "File the proper documents." Harrison's eyebrows rose, but he was professional enough not to ask questions. He pulled out the marriage registry, dipped his pen in ink. "Miss Dawson, you enter this marriage of your own free will?" "Yes," Willa said. Her voice was steady. "Lucas told me that later, said he'd been watching for any sign she wanted to back out, any hesitation he could use as an excuse to stop this, but she stood straight and answered clearly. Mr. Reed, you enter this marriage of your own free will?" "Yes." "Any objections to this union should be stated now." Silence, just the scratch of Harrison's pen on paper, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant sounds of the town going about its Saturday business. "Sign here," Harrison said, turning the register toward them. Lucas signed first. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, a careful, deliberate script that spoke of someone who'd taught himself to write properly, despite not having much formal education. Then he handed the pen to Willa. She hesitated for just a moment. Lucas saw her hand shake slightly as she reached for the pen, saw her take a breath. Then she signed her name in a flowing script that looked like it belonged in a fancy schoolroom, not a dusty clerk's office in Arizona territory. Wilhelmina Dawson became Wilhelmina Reed with 6 strokes of a pen. "That's it," Harrison said. "You're legally married. $2 for the filing fee," Lucas paid. Harrison gave them a certificate, official document with seals and signatures proving they were husband and wife in the eyes of the law. Willa folded it carefully and tucked it into her reticule. They walked out into the bright Saturday sunshine as a married couple. "We should go to the general store," Willa said. "I made a list of supplies we need, so practical, so focused on the ordinary details of life instead of the extraordinary thing they'd just done." Lucas told me he admired that about her, the way she could face something momentous and then immediately turn to thinking about flour and sugar and coffee. They were in the general store when Franklin Hargrove found them. I wasn't there for this part. But Mrs. Abernathy from the dress shop told me about it later, and she never lied about anything important, said she was in the general store buying thread when it happened. Hargrove walked in like he owned the place, which, technically, he did, owned the building, leased it to Mr. Simmons, who ran the store. Hargrove was in his 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes, the kind of man who thought money meant he could do whatever he wanted. "Reed," he said, spotting Lucas by the dry goods, "and this must be your wife." The pause before wife was deliberate, making it clear he didn't quite believe it, making it clear he thought something improper was happening. "Mr. Hargrove," Lucas said evenly. "Willa, this is Franklin Hargrove. He owns the bank." Willa extended her hand politely. Hargrove took it, held it just a moment too long, looked her up and down in a way that made Mrs. Abernathy bristle from across the store. "Charming," Hargrove said. "Though I must say, Reed, This marriage came as quite a surprise. So sudden, almost suspicious, one might say. We filed the legal documents this morning, Lucas said. If you have questions about the legitimacy of our marriage, take them up with County Clerk Harrison. Hargrove's smile didn't waver. Oh, I'm sure everything is in order, legally speaking. He released Willa's hand. I simply worry about propriety. A man in your position, Reed, with your history, taking in strange women. People talk. Let them talk. Indeed, though talk can be expensive. Hargrove picked up a can of peaches from the shelf, examined it with false interest. Especially when it affects business relationships. I'd hate to see your credit at the bank impacted by unsavory rumors. There it was, the threat underneath the polite words. Lucas had a loan with Hargrove's bank. Small one, used to buy cattle last year. If Hargrove called it in early, Lucas would be in trouble. My credit is good, Lucas said. I've never missed a payment. Not yet. Hargrove set down the peaches. But circumstances change. Droughts happen. Cattle die. Loans become difficult to service. He looked directly at Lucas. Especially for men who make enemies of the wrong people. Mrs. Abernathy said the air in the store went cold. Said she could see Lucas's hands clench into fists. Could see Willa go very still, understanding that something dangerous was happening even if she didn't know all the details. Then Willa spoke. Mr. Hargrove, she said, her voice sweet as honey. I couldn't help but notice you mentioned business relationships. I assume you mean your partnership with James Walton? Hargrove's eyes narrowed. Mr. Walton and I have various business interests together, yes. How interesting. Willa tilted her head, all innocence. I was Mr. Walton's intended bride, you know, before he rejected me. I wonder, was that business too, or just personal cruelty? The store went silent. Even Mr. Simmons stopped counting change to listen. Hargrove's smile turned sharp. I wouldn't presume to know, Mr. Walton's private affairs, he said, though I understand he found you unsuitable. His words, not mine. Yes, he made that quite clear in his letter. Willa didn't flinch. Tell me, does he regret that decision now? Now that I'm legally married to Lucas Reed and no longer available for whatever scheme you two were planning? Mrs. Abernathy said you could have heard a pin drop. Willa had just called out their conspiracy in public, politely but unmistakably. Had made it clear she knew this was about more than just propriety or reputation, had refused to be intimidated. Hargrove's face went red. You're making serious accusations, Mrs. Reed. Am I? Willa's voice stayed sweet. I was merely asking questions, but if you'd like to discuss accusations, we could talk about why you're threatening my husband's credit when he's never missed a payment. We could discuss what business interest you have in making life difficult for a man whose only crime was testifying honestly about your former partner's illegal labor practices. Lucas told me later he'd never been so shocked in his life. Willa had somehow pieced together the connection between Hargrove and Thomas Walton, had figured out that this was about revenge for something that happened 5 years ago, had walked into a confrontation with a powerful man and held her ground without breaking a sweat. Hargrove stepped closer to Willa, too close, invading her space, trying to intimidate her with his physical presence. You don't know what you're talking about, he said quietly. Don't I? Willa didn't step back. Then explain it to me. Explain why you care so much about my marriage. Explain why you and James Walton are so interested in Lucas Reed's business. Explain what you're really after. That's enough, Lucas said, putting himself between Willa and Hargrove. We're done here. He took Willa's arm, guided her toward the door. But Hargrove called after them, You should watch yourself, Reed, and your wife. This territory can be dangerous for people who don't know their place. Lucas stopped, turned slowly. Is that a threat, Hargrove? It's friendly advice. Hargrove's smile was cold, though I'd hate to see anything happen to your pretty new bride. Accidents happen out on isolated ranches. Animals get spooked. People get hurt. Would be a shame if something like that occurred. Mrs. Abernathy said Lucas went pale. said she'd never seen him so angry. His whole body went tense, like a rope pulled too tight. For a moment she thought he might actually hit Hargrove right there in the general store, but Willa touched his arm. "Let's go," she said quietly. "He's not worth it." Lucas let her lead him out. They loaded their supplies into the wagon in silence, drove out of town without speaking. But Mrs. Abernathy said she could see it in both their faces. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about protecting reputations anymore. This was war. They got back to the ranch mid-afternoon. I was working in the barn when I heard the wagon, came out to help unload, and stopped when I saw their faces. "What happened?" I asked. Lucas told me. All of it. Hargrove's threats, Willa's confrontation, the implication that something might happen to her if they didn't back down. "That son of a bitch," I said. "He threatened her directly?" "Not directly enough that we could prove it," Lucas said. "But the message was clear." I looked at Willa, expecting to see fear. Instead, I saw fury. "He made a mistake," she said, carrying supplies into the house. "Threatening me was a mistake." Willa, "No, Lucas, listen to me." She set down the flour sack with enough force to raise a small cloud of dust. "I've spent my entire life being polite, being proper, accepting how men treated me because that's what women are supposed to do. My father made bad decisions, and I paid the price. James Walton rejected me, and I accepted it. But Franklin Hargrove threatening me? In public? That's different." "It's dangerous," Lucas said. "I don't care." Her eyes were blazing. "He thinks he can intimidate us into leaving? Into selling whatever it is he wants? He's wrong." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we find out what he's really after." Willa pulled off her bonnet, started unpinning her hair. "There's a reason he wants you gone, Lucas. A reason beyond old grudges, and I'm going to find out what it is." She disappeared into the house. Lucas looked at me, helpless. "She is right," I said. "Hargrove would not threaten violence unless he wants something specific, something worth the risk." "The ranch?" "Maybe, or something on it." We both turned to look at the land. 160 acres of brown earth and scrub brush, a creek that ran year-round, mountains in the distance. Nothing obviously valuable, nothing that would make a man like Hargrove risk everything. But something was here, something worth fighting for. That night, after supper, Willa spread a map on the kitchen table. "Where did you get this?" Lucas asked. "County clerk's office. While you were paying for the marriage license, I asked to see property maps." She traced her finger along the lines. "Look, your property line runs along this creek here, and the creek feeds into the main water source for 3 other ranches, Colton's, the Circle T, and a smaller homestead to the east." Lucas leaned closer. So water is everything out here, isn't it? In drought years, whoever controls the creek controls who survives." I felt something cold settle in my gut. "Dios mío," I whispered. She is right. Willa looked at me, then at Lucas. "What if Hargrove wants the ranch because he wants the water rights? What if he's planning to buy up all the ranches in this valley, and yours is the key to controlling everyone else?" Lucas stared at the map. "If he controls my stretch of creek," he said slowly, "he could cut off water to Colton and the others, force them to buy from him at whatever price he names, or force them to sell their land cheap." "Exactly." Willa's finger tapped the creek line. "And if I'm right, he's been planning this for a while. The rustlers who hit Colton's ranch last month, what if that wasn't random? What if Hargrove's been trying to weaken all of you financially, make you desperate enough to sell?" It made terrible sense. All of it. The rustlers. Hargrove's interest in Lucas's marriage. The threats. Even James Walton's mail-order bride scheme. Send for a woman, reject her publicly to humiliate Lucas, maybe make him desperate enough to leave. "We need proof," Lucas said. "I know." Willa rolled up the map. "And I have an idea where to find it. The county clerk's office keeps records of all land transactions. If Hargrove has been buying up property, there will be a paper trail." "How do you know this?" She smiled slightly. "My father was a businessman, remember? I used to help him with his books. I know how to read financial records." Lucas looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not just a desperate woman who needed work, not just a housekeeper who happened to be educated, but a partner, someone who could think strategically, someone who could fight. "Monday," he said. "We'll go back to town Monday. Look at the records." "No." Willa shook her head. "You stay here. Hargrove will be watching you. But no one pays attention to wives running errands. I'll go with Pedro. We'll say I'm shopping for fabric." "It is too dangerous," I protested. "It's more dangerous not to know what we're facing." She met my eyes. "Please, Pedro, I can do this. But I need your help." I looked at Lucas. He was struggling, wanting to protect her, wanting to handle this himself like he always handled everything, but also recognizing that she was right, that she could move through town without raising suspicion in ways he couldn't. "You stay with her every moment," he said to me. "Don't let her out of your sight." "See, boss?" "And Willa," he stopped, searching for words. "Be careful, please." She touched his hand briefly. "I will." That touch said more than words could. Said she understood he was worried. Said she appreciated his care. Said something was growing between them that went beyond a business arrangement or a marriage on paper. Then she pulled away, all business again. "I should get some rest. Monday will be a long day." She headed toward her bedroom, paused at the door. "Thank you, both of you, for trusting me." After she left, Lucas and I sat in silence. "She is something," I said finally. "Yeah." Lucas stared at the closed bedroom door. "Yeah, she is. You care for her. I barely know her." "That is not what I asked." Lucas ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "It's been a week, Pedro. 1 week. I can't—" He stopped, started again. "Today we signed papers that made her my wife, legal wife, and I stood there thinking about what Hargrove said, about accidents happening, and I wanted to kill him with my bare hands, not because of the threat to me, because of the threat to her. That is called caring. That's called being a decent human being." "No." I shook my head. "A decent human being feels responsibility. What you feel is more than that." He didn't argue, just sat there, looking at the map Willa had left on the table, at the creek line that might be worth killing for, at the evidence of her intelligence and courage spread out in careful lines and notations. "This is going to get worse," he said quietly, "before it gets better. If we're right about what Hargrove wants, he won't stop until he has it, or we're dead. Then we fight. She could leave, get on a train tomorrow, be safe." "But she will not," I said, "because she needs the money, because she has a sister depending on her, and because I think she is tired of running from men who try to break her." Lucas nodded slowly. Outside, the night settled over the ranch. The familiar sounds, cattle, wind, distant coyotes. Everything the same as it had been for years. But everything was different now. A week ago, Lucas had been alone with his guilt and his memories and his quiet determination to make the ranch succeed. Now he had a wife, real on paper, complicated in practice, who was smart and fierce and ready to fight battles that weren't even hers to fight. Now he had something to lose, and men like Franklin Hargrove, they knew how to exploit that, knew how to find the thing you cared about most and threaten it until you broke. Monday was coming, and with it, answers, or war, maybe both. Monday morning, Willa and I rode to town in the wagon. She wore her simplest dress, carried a shopping basket, looked like any rancher's wife running errands. Nobody would suspect she was about to break into county records looking for evidence of conspiracy. The clerk's office was quiet. Harrison was out to lunch. Willa had timed it perfectly. She smiled at the young assistant, said she needed to check property boundaries for a fence Lucas was planning. The boy barely looked up, just waved her toward the filing cabinets. It took her 20 minutes. 20 minutes of flipping through deed transfers, loan records, water rights documents. Her hands moved fast, efficient, pulling papers and making notes in a small book she'd brought. I stood by the door, watching the street, ready to warn her if Harrison came back. "Pedro," she whispered, "look at this." I crossed to where she stood. The document was a survey map, dated 6 months ago. It showed the double R and the surrounding properties. And there, marked in red ink along Lucas's creek, were notations. Primary water source, valley control point. "There's more," Willa said, pulling another paper. "Hargrove's already bought the homestead to the east, paid half what it was worth. The family was desperate after rustlers hit them twice. And look, he's got unsigned purchase agreements for 2 more ranches. He's been planning this for months. But he cannot force the boss to sell. No, but he can make life impossible until Lucas has no choice." She kept reading. "Bank loans he can call in. Water access he can legally challenge. Rustlers he can hire to destroy the herd. He'll bleed Lucas dry, then buy the ranch for pennies." I felt sick. All of it laid out in legal documents and survey maps. Proof that Hargrove was systematically destroying the valley's independent ranchers to build his own empire. "We need to take this to the sheriff," I said. "The sheriff is on Hargrove's payroll." Willa was copying names and dates into her notebook. "No, we need something better. We need—" The door opened. Harrison walked in, stopped when he saw us. His eyes went to the open filing cabinet, to the papers spread on the table, to Willa's notebook. "Mrs. Reed," he said slowly, "what exactly are you doing?" Willa didn't hesitate. "Research," she said, closing her notebook calmly. "My husband wanted information about water rights before he invests in expanding the herd. I hope you don't mind. Your assistant said it was fine to look at public records." Harrison's expression said he didn't believe her. But public records were public. She hadn't done anything illegal, just uncomfortable for certain powerful men if word got out what she'd found. "I'd prefer if you made formal requests in writing," Harrison said. "Of course." Willa gathered her things. "Thank you for your assistance." We left quickly. Didn't speak until we were in the wagon, heading out of town. Then Willa pulled out her notebook, showed me the names she'd copied. 6 ranches, she said. Hargrove's targeting 6 ranches, and Lucas's is the key to all of them. If we can prove he's been hiring the rustlers, orchestrating the attacks, how do we prove that? She smiled. We don't. We just make him think we can. That evening, Lucas read through Willa's notes with growing anger. "Son of a bitch," he said quietly. "He's been planning this since before I even knew there was a threat." "The question is what we do now," Willa said. "We fight." Lucas's jaw was set. "I'll talk to Colton and the other ranchers. Show them what you found. We stand together, Hargrove can't touch us. Or," Willa said carefully, "we negotiate." Lucas stared at her. "Negotiate? After he threatened you?" "Listen," she leaned forward. "Hargrove wants water rights. What if we give him access, limited, controlled, at fair prices, in exchange for leaving the ranches alone? He gets what he wants, we keep our land. That's giving him exactly what he's trying to steal. No, stealing would be him taking everything. This is us controlling the terms." Willa's voice was steady. "Sometimes winning isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about making them realize fighting you costs more than dealing with you fairly." I saw Lucas struggling, saw him wanting to fight, wanting revenge for the threats and the schemes and the months of sabotage, but also seeing the wisdom in what Willa was saying, that she was offering him a way out that didn't end in violence or financial ruin. "What if he refuses?" Lucas asked. "Then we take what I found to every newspaper in the territory," Willa said. "We make sure everyone knows Franklin Hargrove has been systematically destroying independent ranchers to build a monopoly. We ruin his reputation so thoroughly that his business partners abandon him and his bank collapses." Lucas looked at her with something like awe. "You'd do that?" "I'd do worse than that to protect what's ours." "Ours." Not his ranch, not her job. "Ours." The word hung in the air between them. "All right," Lucas said finally. "We try it your way first. But Pedro and I go with you. I won't have you facing Hargrove alone again." The meeting happened 3 days later. Hargrove came to the ranch, neutral ground Willa had suggested. Lucas and I stood on either side of her on the porch as Hargrove's buggy rolled up. He looked confident, smug even, like he thought he'd already won. "Mrs. Reed," he said, climbing down, You wanted to discuss business? Water rights, Willa said. We know what you want. We know what you've been doing, and we're prepared to offer you a deal. Hargrove's smile didn't waver. I don't know what you think you know. Willa pulled out her notebook, started reading. Names, dates, property transfers, loan terms, evidence of a systematic campaign to control the valley's water. Hargrove's smile faded. You can't prove any of that. Can't I? Willa met his eyes. I have copies of documents. I have testimony from families you forced out. I have enough to make your life very difficult, Mr. Hargrove. Or, she paused, you can accept our offer. Limited water access at fair market rates. A legal contract that protects both parties. You get what you want. We keep our land. And if I refuse? Then I send everything I have to every newspaper between here and San Francisco, Willa said calmly, and you become the man who destroyed honest ranchers to line his own pockets. Good luck keeping business partners after that. Hargrove looked at Lucas. You're going to let your wife threaten me? She's not threatening, Lucas said. She's negotiating. I'd listen if I were you. The silence stretched out. Finally, Hargrove nodded slowly. I'll have my lawyer draw up terms. I'll have mine review them, Willa countered. After Hargrove left, Lucas turned to Willa. You don't have a lawyer. He doesn't know that. She smiled. Mrs. Abernathy's brother is a lawyer in Tucson. He'll work for what we can afford. Lucas started laughing. Couldn't help it. This woman who'd been here 2 weeks had just outmaneuvered one of the most powerful men in the territory, using nothing but intelligence and nerve. You're terrifying, he said. I'm practical, she corrected. But she was smiling too. That night I found them on the porch together, sitting close but not touching, watching the sun set over the mountains. The crisis was over. The ranch was safe. Everything should have felt settled. But something was still unfinished between them. Pedro said you're thinking about the Davis graves, Willa said quietly. Lucas nodded. Thank you, he said to Willa. For what? For staying? For fighting? He stopped. For everything. She smiled. I told you I came west to build a new life. I think I'm starting to find it. You want to know how it ended, muchacho? The legal ending or the real one? Legally, Hargrove signed the water contract, paid fair rates for 20 years until he died of a heart attack. James Walton left the territory in shame. The rustlers stopped. The ranches prospered. But the real ending? That took longer to unfold. Lucas and Willa stayed married on paper, stayed housekeeper and employer in their heads. Until one night, about 3 months after that confrontation, Willa came to his room instead of hers. No drama, no big declaration, just quiet certainty that what had started as convenience had become something real. Sarah Elizabeth was born the following spring, then 2 more children after that. The garden flourished. The ranch grew. Emily came west like Willa promised, married Jim Colton's younger brother, raised 5 children in the next valley over. And those graves on the hill? Lucas planted wildflowers there, not to forget, but to remember with gratitude instead of guilt. He'd visit sometimes, but not alone anymore. Willa would go with him, and later the children, and they'd tend the flowers together. That photograph you asked about, the one on the mantel, taken on their 10th anniversary. They had a proper ceremony then, in the church, with the whole town watching. Renewed vows they'd first spoken in a dusty clerk's office, made real what had always been real, just took them a while to admit it. Willa died 2 years ago, pneumonia. Lucas followed 6 months later. Heart just gave out, the doctor said. But I knew better. He'd kept his promise. He'd lived fully, loved deeply, built something that mattered. And when it was time, he was ready to rest. The sun's getting low now, Miguel. Sarah will be calling us for supper soon. She runs this ranch better than her father did, and that's saying something. Has 3 grown children of her own, and they're already talking about the next generation. That's what Willa built. Not just a ranch, not just a family, but a legacy of choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, of fighting for what mattered, of turning a business arrangement into a love that lasted 25 years and outlived them both. The town still tells it wrong, you know. says Lucas Reed saved a woman at a train depot, but I was there. I watched it happen, and I know the truth. They saved each other.